The unimaginable, if the U.S. did default, right? It would be far worse than 2011 and that S&P downgrade. I mean, that's probably fair to say. Yields would initially spike, and then they would plunge after the economy dips into recession or collapses into recession. What does it mean for the global south, though, developing countries? We were talking about this offline just a couple of seconds ago. You know, they have been crushed as interest rates have rocketed over the last several years, and their debt load is just enormous.
Yes, well, it's not so much the debt load, but the financing of that debt load. So I think that we saw from last year rising interest rates at the global level, driven by the US, and this has put pressure on the cost of borrowing in developing economies. Let's also remember the external component of that debt, so the dollar-denominated debt. And, you know, the rising, tightening global financial conditions has led to a dollar appreciation over the past year. It's appreciated somewhat recently, but overall it's appreciated. And this puts pressure on those developing economies that have high shares of dollar-denominated debt because it can push it into an unsustainable position.
Very quickly, ADB, Asian Development Bank Institute, is the think tank arm of the Asian Development Bank. You're based in Tokyo. The bank itself is headquartered in Manila. And one of the things that you guys do is provide policy recommendations to G7 governments. You just did that with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida.
Yes.
Bullet points, what was the most important thing that you thought he needed to pay attention to?
Well, I think the key message is to increase the resilience in global supply chains. What we've learned over the past couple of years is that there are clear vulnerabilities in global supply chains. We learned it from the pandemic, and then we learned it from the invasion of Ukraine. And this really puts additional pressure on prices at the global level because it restricts supply and therefore it worsens the cost of living in developing economies. And in order to basically enhance the resilience of the global supply chains, what's necessary is to involve more economies in that. And one of the messages from the Think 7, which was the engagement group that ADBI was chairing, was to really include developing economies in that process, thereby de-risking the global supply chain overall. And this is also, of course, beneficial at the global level then.
Okay. All right, so you're saying the G7 needs to onboard the global south much more in terms of supply chain diversification, as well as, of course, this whole issue of debt restructuring. Just very quickly. We talked about how a lot of this must involve the private sector, must involve China as well. How much can G7 do on that front? Quickly.
Well, I think that, you know, one of the things that we've seen over the past 20 years is a shift in the creditor base from the Paris Club to China and private creditors. Now, by extension, you know, to restructure that debt effectively will necessitate including private creditors and China in the restructuring. So I think that it's a difficult proposition, of course, but I think that incentivizing involvement in the discussions will be key.